good afternoon everyone, and welcome to January's online seminar, the 7th in a series of 9. Our topic today is Mastering Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and our special guest speaker from Progress International Limited is Ken Marshall.
All applause me before I start, you didn't want to be right yet. Mastering NLP, Arthur's just said the title there. I'm going to just really put it in a context for the next half hour, because what I'm going to share with you is just really the peak of the mountain, because it is a huge topic, particularly mastering it. It could take a little bit more than a half-hour session, but this is really just to give you a taster, whet your appetite, maybe answer some questions, and maybe solve some mysteries that some of you had if you've heard of NLP. Now, is anybody here in the audience that has heard the phrase NLP but doesn't know what it means, or is anybody here that actually doesn't? Okay, so you've heard it called bandied about, and you don't know what the NLP bit stands for, how it works. Has anybody here not even heard of NLP? Okay, why are you here? What you're actually demonstrating there is one of the key principles of NLP, which is one of the things we're going to talk about today, which is curiosity. You got curious. Oh, mastering NLP, I wonder what that is. Particularly if you read the blurb underneath about what it could do for you. And we're going to be looking at that as well as we go through. As I said, it is a huge topic. So I don't want to give you any false expectations. I don't want you to go away thinking in about 28 minutes time you've mastered NLP. I've been learning this for probably the best part of 12, 15 years. It doesn't take you 15 years to master it, but it's something which you get involved in and it absorbs you. What you will find as I go through some of the principles is that you actually already do use many of NLP principles anyway. And I'm not going to keep bombarding you with jargon. I am going to explain to you what NLP stands for, what it means, and where it came from, and how it started to be about. It's been growing in popularity since the mid-1970s. And it's become mainstream today. I mean, if you went back to the 1980s, NLP was regarded as a peripheral science. It's part of the psychology sciences, it's part of applied psychology, but to call it actually applied psychology doesn't really do it justice, because it goes much wider than that, and it is something you can use in all aspects of your life. So what is NLP? Well, it's something which actually allows us to enhance the way we communicate, the way we work in commerce, the way we actually change, actually how we tackle personal change, and how we actually do personal development. So to answer the question, let me just take you through what each of the letters stands for and expand on that. To take away some of the mystery initially, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Now what's interesting is when people come up to me and say, NLP, what's that? And I go, well, it's Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and they just look at me even more puzzled and go, well, what's that? So it's to take away some of the mystique. This is just, in NLP terminology, in NLP processes, all words are just labels that actually allow us to try and understand what's going on. When we look at this in each of its contexts, neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro is part of the human body, the neurological senses, which means that we can control the way we understand the world. It's how we perceive things happening around us. So it deals with the senses you use to make sense of what's happening around you in each day interaction. So it's how you see things, it's how you hear things, it's how you feel about things, maybe smells, maybe tastes. For instance, how many people here have gone into a situation, maybe gone into an old building, and the smell of the building has taken you back to childhood? Maybe to a memory of when you was at school, maybe some, but the way they used to polish the corridors. You used to go in some building and the smell of the polish would transport you back in time to when I was about 5 or 6 years old. This is what they found when they did the research on this. Each one of us has a whole series of neurological processes which allows us to make sense of the world. We've then got the linguistic part, which is the words we use, the way we actually communicate to one another, how we speak, the tone of voice we use, maybe the body language too, to an extent. There are certain words which we hear, which will straight away make us feel something from the neurological senses. So for instance, if I just throw out a word to you and just tell me how you feel about it, I will say the word discipline. The word discipline. What's the first thing that comes into your mind when I say the word discipline?
School.
School, right? And what else? So school, why school?
I just think I immediately have a picture of a headmaster in my head.
Yeah. And one of the things you're doing there as part of the NLP process is you suddenly visualise something. Some of you visualise it, some of you will hear it, you may not see the headmaster, you may actually hear the headmaster shouting and pointing a finger. So you go a bit into visualisation, a bit of hearing, or maybe just a feeling. Maybe the headmaster told you off and you can remember feeling embarrassed or humiliated. And what NLP uses is it recognises that we've got all of these processes happening. We've got the neuro, we've got the linguistic. Now, interestingly on the word discipline, when I do training in companies to help people with dealing with performance issues, they will often use discipline in that context of old school times, punishment, actually telling somebody off. But if you look in the dictionary, that definition of punishment is the 7th definition. The top definition of discipline is actually to inform, to instruct and to improve. So again, it's what our experiences of that word to us makes us see it, feel it, or hear it in a different way. The programming part is actually the behaviours. The behaviours that we demonstrate that we exhibit, which will get us outcomes, whether they be desirable outcomes or undesirable outcomes. So therefore we've got the neuro, senses, the language we use, and the programming, the behaviours that we've got used to using. What we've got to recognise is that every one of us, no one excepted, usually works to a daily basis of over 80% of what we do is by habit. You don't actually have to go, oh, how do I do this? How do I tie my shoelaces? How do I get dressed? How do I go to work? It's all by habit, because one of the things the human being is very good at, and this is what the research shows, is that we're very good at what's known as single experience learning. We can actually learn something very quickly if the emotion attached to it is very strong. And therefore we got an outcome, whether it be I want to avoid some pain or I want to get the pleasure. And again, we'll look at that in a bit more detail as we go through. So that's what NLP stands for. As you can see, it is a big topic, and to go into each of these in detail could take a bit of time. At the end I will give you some recommended reading. There's a lot of information on this that's been, if you like, published over the last 15 years, where they've started to make it less jargonistic. They've actually started to relate it to the real world, which is great. And in fact, that's what the pioneers, the people that discovered or actually came up with NLP, wanted, because it is an applicable science. It's not a theory science, it's what you do, rather than what you just read about. So while I'll give you some recommended reading, which is good to get you started, what I recommend people do is to take this to the next level and actually start using it. And you don't have to go on a training course to do that, although that will help. You can actually start to put it into practice immediately, as you will see. Even after this session, I'll give you some things which you can do, which will help you with that. Let me just give you a quick overview of where it came from. Back in the mid-1970s, two guys called Richard Bandler and John Grinder, a mathematician and a scientist, were intrigued and curious, that word again, about how certain people excelled at doing something well. So they had a job, their initial focus was on therapists. They was interested in therapists. How some therapists at that time, because California, from California, so California was rife with therapists, I think it still is. And what they actually wanted was to discover why were some therapists really good and excellent and got fantastic results for their clients, while others were either average, mediocre or poor. And they actually spent a lot of time and effort and money just going in, getting permission to study these therapists in action. They then took the research and the actual, if you like, studies outside of that, because they realised it was about human behaviours. But what they discovered were that these people that excelled used thought processes in a certain way, used certain language patterns in a certain way, and their behaviours were a certain type of behaviour, which they actually consistently put into practice. And what they found were the people that got the poor results also were using this, but they were using it in the negative context. They were actually doing themselves, making it harder for themselves by the way they thought. And we'll have a look at that in terms of beliefs, based on beliefs. What do you believe to be true? One of the things we know about the human being is that we will always behave true to our belief. So if you believe something is going to be bad for you, you behave accordingly and you avoid it. Even if somebody's given you false information and have told you a lie and said that's bad for you, avoid that. If you trust them and believe them, therefore if you believe it, you behave accordingly. And that's what their research found and what was happening here. These people believed a certain thing, they behaved in a certain way, and what they was interested in was how they could improve themselves. And they spent as much time working on themselves as they did with their clients, which was actually one of the key goals of personal development. And that's why NLP is an excellent personal development tool. In fact, it's been used in sport consistently for decades now. The other thing that tended to happen was they discovered 4 key pillars of NLP. And what we're going to share with you now are the 4 pillars and the key principles. And what Bandler and Grinder discovered is that when these people that they found that were completely excelling at what they did, worked with these 4 pillars and these basic principles all the time, as if they were totally true. And what it creates is what's known as a self-fulfilling prophecy, which I'll give you an example of shortly. When we, one of the things you just mentioned about, when I asked you the word discipline, in terms of the neuro, what you will find, and this is going to be something I'm going to show you as a pattern later on, we've got the VAK. Anyone familiar with VAK? Think of your senses. What did you just do when I said to you about discipline? Visualise. So what will happen is, you'll either visualise something, you'll either hear it, or you will feel it. And the word they use for this is the technical term of kinesthetic. It's another form of the feelings. And so what we find is that when people communicate, and each of you have got your own preferred channel of communication, we use all 3 of these, but what we tend to do is we have one which is our favourite. So maybe yours is visualisation, because you went straight to visualisation, other people will be auditory, other people will be kinesthetic. Now this is important to recognise because it ties in with the pillars, the 4 pillars. You've obviously got the 2 other senses here, which is smell and taste. They do tend to get used less in everyday communications. They tend to be used for nostalgia and memories, like the example I gave you earlier, the smell of school. It takes me back in time. Now the 4 pillars that Richard Bandler and John Grinder discovered were these. The 4 pillars were outcomes, sensory acuity, behavioural flexibility and rapport. And if you focus on these 4 and think about how this can affect the way you currently do things, you will see very quickly how NLP actually helps us. Now, we've got some people in the audience, and maybe some people watching that hadn't heard of NLP before, and knew what heard of NLP in the letters but didn't know what it was. Is there anybody here that has heard of NLP and maybe has been a bit suspicious or sceptical of it? No? One of the things we tend to find with NLP is some people are sceptical of it because when it's actually put into practice, the results, the outcomes it gets can be very quick, can be very rapid. To give you an example, one of the things Richard Bandler has perfected over the 40 years he's been involved in this is what's known as the quick phobia cure. Now, has anybody here got a phobia? Okay, don't share us, because I don't want to get you upset. Now, what you can do with this technique, with the NLP process, in the right circumstances, in the right conditions, is that you can actually cure somebody's phobia inside 15 minutes. Completely take it away. And what you do is you give them the resources to deal with it and manage it themselves. So while it may still have a little bit of thing there, it won't become a phobia anymore, it'll be a manageable process. And one of the things that's made people suspicious of NLP in the past are the very reason is, it can't work because it's too quick, it happens too rapidly. And why that is a problem for some people is because it's what's known as a limiting belief. So we've got outcomes, we've got sensory acuity, behavioural flexibility, rapport. Outcomes you're familiar with, probably everyone in this room, any work for any company, has probably heard of what's known as SMART objectives. Well, this is based on SMART objectives, but this is actually even more detailed. The full title for outcomes is well-formed outcomes. And the reason it's at the top of the list is a very sound one. Has anybody here read the book by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits? Okay. What's one of the things he says in one of his principles of when you're planning something, when you want something to happen? Where do you start? Where's the best place to start? At the end. And this is and that's an NLP process. That's where that's come from. Yeah, you always start at the end. So with change, with personal change, what I want to be able to do is to sit down and say, what is it I want to change about myself? Where do I want to be this time next year? And one of the questions we ask when you actually write down your outcomes, they've got to be very well formed outcomes, very specific, obviously measurable, so that you can determine, well, how do I know I've achieved that? Well, because this and this and this has happened in that time frame. And if that well formed outcome, doesn't excite you enough, if it's not something which you're really keen to start getting stuck into, then go back and redo it because it's the wrong outcome. When we take people through personal change programs, one of the things we will ask them is just how badly do you want to change? And it may be with somebody who's not happy with their life, not happy with their job, not happy with where they are, and they say, I want to change. And then we find it's just lip service. And what NLP will do is that if you really want to change, these tools can help you change that much quickly and much more effectively. Once you've got the outcomes, it helps us with the sensory acuity. Anyone come across sensory acuity before? It's something you've all got and you've all used, but you use it at different levels. What this really means is having an eye for detail. When you go into a room, what exactly do you notice is happening in the room? Do you just see people milling about, or do you actually be able to notice there's an atmosphere in the room, that certain people are behaving in certain ways, that something doesn't seem quite right, or you notice the details? For instance, with sensory acuity, some people say, well, that's a flip chart pen. Someone else will go, well, it's a flip chart pen with a green top and white writing. And someone else will go, well, that's a flip chart pen and it's this certain shape and it's this length, and it's actually got Impeger on the side, and it's got a flip chart marker written in white, and it's got a few scratches on it, and it looks like it's well worn and well used, and therefore what they're noticing is the finer detail. And what the NLP process, what Richard Bandler discovered, is that the sensory acuity, the more we can crank that up, the more likely we are to notice things which actually help us with our outcomes. And this is where real luck happens. When people say about, oh, you're lucky, how come all these things happen to you? You can always get the breaks. And the best answer I've had to that is when somebody said, yeah, you know what, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And what tends to happen is my outcomes are very clearly written, and my sensory acuity goes up, and I start noticing opportunities that were always there, but are no longer there, that are no longer hidden. I actually see them, it filters through. And what NLP discovered was that in everybody's brain there's a filter called the reticular activating system. And you've all experienced this, I'm sure, at some point in your life. How many people here have actually bought perhaps a new car or something new, and then as soon as you've bought it and you've had it for a few days and the novelty's still there, suddenly notice there's loads of them around? Yeah? And it's almost like the same colour, same time, and you're thinking, well, weren't they there before? Yeah, well, of course they were. But what happens is, before you bought it, before you was interested in that, the brain wasn't going to let that through. What it's got a filter effect to stop you being bombarded with billions and billions of pieces of data which are not relevant to you. As soon as you write a well-formed outcome, the brain magically creates this filter to let this through. Anything to do with your outcomes, it lets through. So therefore, by cranking the sensory acuity up, you suddenly notice things that were always there, but you didn't see them before because it wasn't pertinent to you. And luck is where preparation and opportunity meet. And that's the difference. And that's why the pessimists tend to have a harder time trying to get breakthroughs than the optimists, because they're all looking for the break and therefore see it. Their level of sensory acuity is up. The behavioural flexibility is really about realising that if I want to get a different result, I've got to do something else. The best way to describe this is by sharing with you Einstein's definition of insanity. Has anyone heard of Einstein's definition of insanity? Yeah? Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expecting a different result. It ain't going to happen. It's going to drive you crazy. Yeah? So behavioural flexibility is about, hang on, perhaps I should change the way I'm doing things here if I want a different result. I've tried it that way for years, it hasn't got me the outcome I want. Let's shift it. And rapport, why is rapport important?
Communication.
Yeah. What is it we actually will need to make sure we get the outcomes we desire? It's very rare we can do it without this. So what is it we need? Can we do it all on our own? Yeah, we need support, cooperation, we need people to give us a break. Well, I'll let you into a little secret. People tend to do that more for people they like than for people they don't. And what rapport is really about is creating this two-way process where suddenly somebody finds you interesting and somebody finds you nice to be with. In fact, what they're doing in their heads, the internal dialogue, they're going, I really like you, you're familiar to me. Who is it? Oh yes, me. You're like me. What we tend to find is that people tend to like people like them. And so when we come back to our senses, what we can do by having the right sensory acuity, what NLP taught us, is that we can tune in what's your preferred mode of communication, it's visualization, so therefore I change the way I speak to you for the time being, and I speak more visually, because I know that you can relate to that quicker and understand that better. And therefore you go, hey, just like me, they speak like me. So that's very quickly, and obviously when we look at each of these in turn, if we were to take this as like a training program, we can actually have a one-day training program just to go through the basics on each of these in turn. In fact, I do a 2-day rapport building exercise because it's all the body language and all the other things we need to take into account. So in terms of the pillars, these are the 4 we want to focus on. What I like to see these half-hour sessions as is, A, to whet your appetite, to get you curious more, but also to say, right, I need to be looking at what am I already good at, what do I need to actually have more information on, and more knowledge of, more skills in. This ties in with the key principles. Now, just before I give you the key principles, I want to get you to set the scene here. What Bandler and Grinder discovered for people that excel, and what they were really interested in was creating what we call models of excellence. What they discovered was everything that people do is got a structure. And therefore, if I can study somebody who's doing something really, really well that I love to do, I look at how they do it, and guess what I try and do? I try and copy it. I start to copy it and replicate it. And although I may not be exactly as good as them, I will become much better than I am currently, because I'm actually doing the same processes that got them successful. Now, the way they found this worked, what all of their studies indicated, is that the people that consistently excelled, whatever they did, took these principles I'm going to show you now, and took them as being totally true. Now, when you first look at them, you will actually start to think, they're very awkward, and they're almost like untenable. There's no way that that could be true. But that wasn't the issue. What this was based on was belief. So what I want you to do is when we read these, I want you to imagine how you might tackle situations that you're faced with if the key principles I'm going to take you through now, the basic principles, were actually true. Let me show you what I mean. So I want you to just think of a situation, imagine what you would do differently because this is true. 1, we have all the resources we need. Resources meaning how we feel about things, the skills we've got, the knowledge we've got, how we can tackle it. Yeah? Resilience. Believe that's true. We have all the resources we need, and I'll show you, give you an example in a moment. Then the next one, the meaning of any communication is the effect it has. Now we know that the impact of communication, 93% is non-verbal. How many people have experienced this? You come home, had a stressful day, you walk in, you're distracted, your partner says hi, you say something back, and they say, don't speak to me like that. And you go, like what? I just answered your question. The meaning of the communication is on the effect it has, is because what they picked up was not just the words, but the tone of voice you used. And it wasn't aimed at them, but because they're the only one in the room and they asked you the question, and they can only make the assumption it must have been them that you were angry at. That's the process of communication. That's how powerful it is. It's not what I say, it's how you interpret what I say. Okay, so we have all resources. The meaning of any communication is the effect it has. There is no failure or any feedback. And the map is not the territory, every person's map is unique. Okay, now this is a key one. There's no such thing as failure or any feedback. If that's true, how does that make it different for you to deal with situations that you perhaps are tackling? Maybe with personal change. What does that actually do for you if you actually believe that's true?
You can't fail, so you're not afraid of it anymore.
Right. So what happens in terms of our state of mind, the neuro part of things, is if I do believe I failed, how does it feel to believe you failed? How does it feel to fail?
Demotivating.
What happens to everything? All your energy drops and you start losing heart and you go, oh, that's never good, I'm never getting it. Oh, this is rubbish. And we start creating some excuses so we can justify not doing it anymore. Guess who has this key belief 100%? Every person that's an inventor. Because inventors take a lot of trouble and effort to try and get something to work. How many attempts did it take Dyson to do his bagless vacuum cleaning thing? 5,000 plus. I think he definitely had that as a belief. I think most people after about 15, 20, they go, oh, this ain't going to work, no such thing, it can't happen. Edison, when he did the light bulb, it took him over 10,000 attempts to actually get to the thing that actually worked, because he was trying to discover, well, what will work at this? And even with journalists saying to him, well, you know, when are you going to give up this futile challenge, chase here? Yeah, you keep failing. He goes, no, every time we find a way that it doesn't work, that's feedback saying, oh, that's one step closer to the one that does. That's how to look at it. Never see it as a failure. Now the map is not the territory. This is usually what causes the biggest confusion for many people. It's almost like the menu isn't the meal. In other words, what this is saying is every person's map is unique. How do you see the world? What's your perception of what's happening around you? I can see, the best example of this, if we all trooped along now to the Tate Modern in London and looked at the works of art there, and that's the term I sometimes use loosely for some of them, but that's my opinion, that's my map. We can all go through and look at these different pieces of art, and some of us will go, that's fantastic, while at the same time, at the same piece, we go, well, what is that? That's rubbish. That's just somebody throwing a tin of paint over a wall, surely. So we go, no, I can actually see I can feel where the artist has come from. Now, none of us will be right and wrong, it'll just be what we believe is true to us because it affects us. That map is not the territory, it's an important one with the rapport building. What we often get stuck with, what NLP has given us the tools to do, is to say, rather than make an assumption that they don't understand or they're awkward, how about getting curious as to, I wonder how they're seeing this, what's their map of this situation? And their map of the situation will be based on what they've experienced in life up to this point. And that's why the original research of NLP started in therapy, because what they discovered was the old way of doing therapy was to take somebody back to where the pain started. Bandler and Grinder said, we don't think that's a good idea because people have already had the pain once, why do we want to keep taking them back to the pain? How about if we give them some tools to move them away from the pain and actually rebuild their life and reinvent themselves and actually have a better quality life? So let's not take them to the pain, let's take them to the pleasure. And that's where the NLP process first started. And they realised this works everywhere. In sport, for instance, has anybody come across examples of sports people using this stuff to improve the way they actually perform? Anyone got any examples? Boxing's one. Muhammad Ali. The great Muhammad Ali. He used to actually predict fights. He used to do his little poem, for those who remember. And what was interesting was out of the 19 predictions he made, 17 were spot on. 2 missed the prediction. And when he was asked about how he did this, how did he prepare for a fight, apart from the physical stuff, he did a lot of the NLP techniques of actually visualising doing the fight round for round in his head. And when he was asked, well, how come you got a couple wrong? He said, well, that's when they visualised better than me at the time. And that's how it works. Sally Gunnell, when she was asked after she won her gold medal, what was it like when the German girl was in front of you on the home stretch? Her answer to that question was, it was just how I pictured it. So again, they were using this process, all these principles of I have all the resources I need, I can visualise it, I can actually plan ahead, I can have an outcome, I want to win the race, what have I got to do it? The communication, the meaning of communication is the effect it has. This also applies not only to people you talk to. On a daily basis, who would you say you speak to more than anyone else? Or who speaks to you more than anyone else? What do you think? Who would it be for you?
My colleagues.
Your colleagues? Your colleague at the back is actually right. She's saying telepathy. You're saying yourself.
Myself,
yeah.
yeah.
And therefore, that meaning of any communication is the effect it has. Is also what you say to yourself. What we're very good at is talking ourselves out of things. We go, oh, no, we don't do that. No, I'm useless at those. It's all these excuses. And therefore, you actually get yourself into a decision-making process to say, no, I won't do it. I'm scared. What if it all goes wrong? What if this happens? What if I make a fool of myself? One of the biggest ones I have challenges on is presentation skills courses. Now, with this NLP stuff, I can predict how people will come into the room, in what state of mind they will be in. What state of mind are usually people in when they come into a presentation skills course? Not a very positive one. They're usually very fearful, very anxious, but sometimes completely physically fittable wrecks. And that's because they actually don't believe they've got the resources they need. They think this is going to be awful. They keep telling themselves some very negative things. I'm never any good at this. I just cry up. I'll make myself a right idiot in front of all these people. They believe they're failures at doing public speaking, and therefore my job is to understand that actually that's their perception at the moment. But the map's very different if I can just change their belief systems. And that's really what NLP is based on. The frames of reference. This is a frames of reference tool. This is this. What's your map? Your map, your perception of art, your perception of anything you see is based on your current experiences up to now, what your values and beliefs are, and what your attitudes are to that. And all of these means the NLP in beliefs, empowering or limiting. If you were to believe that people were very easy to get on with, you just saw people just generally nice, if you had that as a strong belief, when you went in and talked to people, what you tend to find is the brain will let through the facts that back that up. So the sort of things you would notice with that would be the positive, the way that people sort of warm to you, the way people sort of are nice to you. And in general, most people will actually be quite polite and courteous. That's what you would notice, and therefore that reinforces that belief. What would happen if your belief was that you can't trust anyone because they're going to stitch you up? Because given half the chance, they would turn you over. If that was your belief, and that could probably well come from being a very young child, if that was your belief and you really hung on to that, when you go in and meet somebody, what would you be like? How would you come across?
Very quiet.
Quiet? How would you be viewing people?
Suspiciously.
Suspiciously, yeah. And what's happened is the chances are they will probably pick up on that. And therefore they will actually avoid you. And therefore that would reinforce the fact to you that say you can't trust them. They won't even talk to me, they won't open up, they seem very guarded and defensive. I wonder why, what are they hiding? And therefore, one of the things we find is that behaviour breeds behaviour, like attracts like. And so therefore, that's known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, what tends to happen is whatever you believe to be true, you will behave accordingly. And one of the key things that NLP can do for us, and I've seen it happen so many times for so many thousands of people, is that it can help people take more control of their life in terms of communication to themselves, to others, improve relationships, improve the way they actually manage their day-to-day workings of not just in work but outside of work. It helps create the life what we call life-work balance in terms of helping people get to grips with how they communicate and what works for them. So one of the key presuppositions I like to finish with, we're aware of the time, is what we started out with. You were curious, that's why you're here. One of the key presuppositions in NLP is curiosity rather than assumption. So rather than just looking at it and saying, well, my map of NLP is, well, it's probably something that might be used for negative stuff, that's an assumption. Find out the facts, be more curious, read a book on it, find out what the experts are saying, find out what ordinary everyday people are saying from experiencing it, and just make a judge for yourself. Otherwise, it's rather like listening to every film critic. I've seen some fantastic films over the years and some fantastic plays where the critics, in their write-up and reviews, have panned them. But that's their viewpoint, that's their map of the territory. And I've gone, I'm going to listen to that, I'm just going to actually make my own judgment, and I go along and I've seen some really good films. I've also seen some ones where they were right, but that's by and by, that's part of the exception. But I was still more curious than making the assumption. And that for me is what it's all about. Become a sponge, want to learn about more. Now if you want to find out any more information about NLP, because it is a huge topic, I'll just give you a bit of a taster. There are some books on the market. NLP Made, I like anything that's easy. NLP Made Easy is a good one by Carol Harris. What I'm going to do is I will give a list of these books to Arthur to put onto the website so you can actually get the details. NLP for managers, we can use it in business context. Understanding Neuro-Linguistic Programming in a week. Again, it chunks it all down nice and easy for you to start to use and see it in action. Introducing NLP by Sue Knight, and developing NLP skills and NLP. I mean, it's just a handful of there are many, many around. There's also audio tapes. If you're more of an auditory person, you can get it on auditory and listen to it in the car or listen to it somewhere quiet. So you can read it, you can listen to it, you can see it. What I want you to start practicing from today is your sensory acuity. Just start being more aware. I don't mean stare people out and frighten them, because that can sometimes happen if you do it a bit inelegantly. But one of the key principles of NLP is intention. It should always be an honourable intention, always leave people feeling better than you found them. But it should also be in terms of just observing and being curious and noticing what's happening around you. Be there in the moment and actually just watch people's behaviours. It's good fun being a people watcher. Okay, so that's. I mean, I could go on talking about this for a lot longer and actually get you to do stuff. And one day I'd like you to have the opportunity to train you on that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your time and attention. And are there any questions? Are there any questions on the online? This is one of those topics where, when I was putting this together, there's so much of it which is so fascinating. It's really difficult knowing what to put in and what to leave out in such a small time frame. But let's see if we've got any questions online.
Yeah, we do have a couple. We've
I'm guaranteed I'll answer them.
got one from Prashan in the CAS team, who says, would you mind telling me more about the trigger action that motivate us and can be applied to all aspects of one's life?
How long have we got? They do say an interesting word there. There is what's known as trigger points. I gave an example earlier. I said the word discipline, and it immediately triggered a process in your brain, which will be a motivator. And we can be motivated away from or towards. So if I actually say a word like discipline, and you go, well, I don't like discipline, and you assume that that's what I mean about going into a certain situation, you will be motivated away from that situation. So therefore you would make a decision not to do it based on that trigger. Again, it could well be false information. It's like if I just say the word blue, if I just say the word blue now, what's the first thing that comes into your mind when I say blue? Sorry? The what?
The band.
No, the band. Okay, the band. Somebody said sky or sea. Yeah. I was thinking of actually sort of like the weather and the wind. It blew the paper away. And that's one of the things with the map is the territory, or what's the interpretation? The communication is what the effect the meaning has on you. So by just saying that one word, you're all taking your own perceptions of that. And that's where most communication situations fall down. Yeah, because people don't actually clarify what they mean. They just go on and say, oh yeah, I know what you mean, and go off and do what they think you mean and get it wrong. So it's always best to check that out. Any others?
I've got a question here from Therese, who says, you mentioned pattern interruption strategies. What is this?
Did I mention that? I don't remember mentioning that. So this is what NLP finds. Is that what's happened is that he knows about pattern interrupt techniques, and I've triggered. So in what I was saying, triggered that off. But a pattern interrupt technique is very useful if you want to change somebody's state. Now, one of the things we do in NLP is that we say state is everything. Why do we say state is everything? Because it's actually a basis of actually getting people to be influenced by you. Now, for instance, you've been doing this from a young age, do it instinctively. That's why a lot of this NLP stuff is instinctively. Before you ask anyone a favour, what's the first thing you check out about before you ask them a favour?
What mood they're in.
What mood they're in, right? Yeah. So if you look at it, we go, oh, they're in a bad mood. I don't think I'm going to get a yes if I ask right now. I'll wait a bit later. If you want to speed that process up, you can do what's known as a pattern interrupt strategy. I had one in New York, in John F. K. Airport, where I came up to the counter to be dealt with by the person on the counter who'd just been given the most almighty abusive telling off by a customer, which I was totally unfounded, totally unfair, but it actually embarrassed this person, and they were completely in a very, very negative state, feeling very bad. I'm thinking, great, I'm next, I want them to help me. So and they wouldn't look at me, they were furiously writing down, you see the steam coming out of their ears. So I thought, here's a good opportunity now for some pattern interrupt. So I just waited for a moment, didn't speak, I just let them sort of like work through. And then I just said, I will tell you one thing right now. And they just stopped. And I stopped on purpose because they had no idea what I was going to tell them, but now they were interested. And my key aim here was just to completely switch the state. And I said, I'll tell you one thing right now. What? There's no way that I'm going to be as rude and abusive to you as that guy, because that was so out of order. And she came back and she goes, well, too right, if you caught me on a good day, we whipped his ass. And I said, he would have deserved every whipping he got, as if you were actually controlling the bus time. So I mean, come on. She goes, oh yes, absolutely. What can I do for you, sir? And that would be a quick example of a pattern interrupt, of changing the state from being very negative and actually not wanting to deal with me to flipping it over to suddenly building rapport very quickly. Suddenly I was actually empathising with this person, and the rapport was built almost instantaneously with a quick pattern interrupt. And this is where the sensory acuity comes in. It's about being aware of this situation, what's happening here, what state are they in. I need to change that state before I actually get dealt with what I want to happen. And with NLP, it's all about win-win. The win-win was that I actually got better service from it, and that person got put into a better state, which is what they deserved anyway. So nobody loses. Okay? So I mean, there's many pattern interrupts, and to go into it in detail would take too long. So, a good question. Any others?
That's it.
Is that it? We've gone over a bit, but okay. Okay, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank thanks very much to Ken. And if you'd like to hear any more about this, please do check out the Learning Zone, which is on HR Online. And join us for the next online seminar, which will be on the 15th of February, where our topic will be making the most of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.